What started last weekend as a simple project to update the thermal paste and maybe clean out the radiator on my NZXT X62 Kraken took an interesting turn when, upon reinstallation of the Kraken cooler, we had an immediate overheating of the CPU and subsequent issues that developed after that. I could not get the system to run and stay operational for any amount of time because of CPU temperature errors. Now, this was problematic. I hadn't done anything to the AIO. I hadn't done anything extraordinary. I just had taken it out of the system to clean it up and put on new thermal paste. Now, before somebody goes, oh, you must have done something to it. Well, the thermal paste was fine. When I took the thermal paste off, when I took the cooler off a second time to examine things, the spread had been good and there was no issue there. The headers were connected properly. All the connections were there. What I found was that it wasn't spinning up. The pump, when you would put your hand on the actual block itself, you wouldn't feel anything vibrating, and that was problematic. After a simple removal and reinstallation, it should be working as it was before, and it wasn't. This led to about a 3-day process, and at the end of the 3 days, we eventually got the thing back up and running and learned a few valuable lessons along the way. So what ultimately happened that caused the AIO to suddenly stop working? Well, there's a lot of things that could go into it, but first let's examine what we did to get it back up and running, because as you could see the NZXT Kraken cooler is back up and operational. And it was a bit of a process. So the first thing I would say is we learned have a backup cooler. And no, I'm not saying that in this process we've learned that AIOs are garbage and you shouldn't use them and you should only use air cooling or go custom loop or nothing. AIOs have their place. That's a video about where their place is right now for another time. But they do serve a very nice function. And again, that's a video for another time. So let's look through this process. So ultimately, what should have been a simple process, should have been a simple cleanup, became much more than that simply because it didn't appear that the pump was working. And when I took the Kraken out the second time, one of the tubes was really hot, the other one was not so much. And I saw conflicting reports on Google search as to what this could be. It could be just air in the system, it could be the pump is dead. I couldn't keep the system on long enough to determine what the actual problem was. It was shutting down immediately. This is where having a second cooler comes in very handy. So this happened about a week ago. Today is Sunday. It happened last Sunday. So what I ended up doing is I went to the local micro center on Monday after work, picked up an EVGA 280 millimeter CLC, put that into my system, and we got a boot. Now the EVGA cooler is a whole nother set of issues that I can discuss for an entire different video. What I can tell you about it is that it's real buggy. The cooler itself works okay. But EVGA's flow control software makes CAM look like award-winning software. Let's just put it to you that way. It had trouble detecting the cooler at first. Then once it did detect a cooler, if I opened up any other fan control software, I couldn't open flow control anymore. It would shut down and then I would not be able to get back into it. So EVGA, you've got some work to do with this software. Particularly, I've seen that a number of people have had issues with AI Suite. I know that there's a lot of different software control out there for fans, and you can use UEFI BIOS controls for fans. I like using AI Suite because it just kind of ties everything together and allows me to make on-the-fly adjustments if I see fit, which I generally don't, but if I want to. But Flow Control does not like AI Suite. CAM didn't like Aura Sync. So the common thread seems to be here. None of these guys like working together. So all of you, if you're going to make a proprietary software, and this is, again, this discussion for another video, it should probably work with all of the different things out there. A lot of noise coming from outside. I don't know what that is. What I ultimately ended up having to do to get the cooler working properly was bypass EVGA's flow control entirely. I unplugged the fans. Actually, let's back up a step. There's another issue with EVGA's cooler, and it's the actual fan design. If you've watched any of the reviews, everybody has said the same thing. The fans aren't that impressive. They can cool pretty well with brute force, but they are exceptionally loud. They are much louder. They make the NZXT fans quiet. and the NZXT fans weren't exactly the quietest fans I've ever experienced. So I decided to go ahead, since EVGA puts on there for use with your favorite fans, I decided to put the NZXT fans on there, and it didn't cooperate very well with me at all. In fact, the fans were spinning, but it was giving me a CPU fan error. So I had to go in and do some more tweaking. I ended up finding a way around it by connecting the AIO connector to the water pump, the little connector that's coming right out of the block. I connected to the water pump header. I connected the radiator fans to fan headers on the motherboard, the CPU fan header. And I went and used AI Suite to tune everything, and it actually worked. It actually was fine. The only downside to that method was I lost control over the LED coloring on the EVGA logo. It just was a static white. It didn't matter. The system was up. But it kind of lingered with me a little bit. Was my Kraken actually dead? So here's where we actually learned something very valuable. First off, if you have a micro USB cable adapter, something, let me just pull this out. Something like this with this kind of end. This is what goes into the Kraken. I don't know if you can see that. I can't see on my display. But if you have a cable like this, just a standard USB cable, micro USB to USB, you can go ahead and plug that into a USB header on the back of your motherboard or the front panel. Plug the Kraken in with the SATA power, and while the other cooler is doing its thing, you can actually get the Kraken working and see if the pump is indeed actually dead. Because this is one of the things with NZXT. They require some kind of proof that the pump isn't working. So they need you to open up CAM software and show that the pump isn't doing anything before they'll consider doing an RMA, which is really not the greatest way to do it. NZXT, I understand you need people to prove this to you, but if somebody's system dead and they can't afford a new cooler, they can't do this. This is physically impossible for them to do. So you need to reconsider that notion. If they send it back to you and it's not broken, send it back to them, so that they know that it's not broken. I mean, you could take these things back without them having to be broken. It's not that serious, I don't think. Either way, I connected it, and it lit up, and it didn't seem to be doing anything. I had my hand on the block, and the block wasn't really, there was no vibration. I couldn't feel anything coming from it, so I kind of took the radiator and was twisting it and turning it, and I could hear the liquid sloshing around in there, but it really wasn't doing anything. So I was turning the pump and the pump block, and I was kind of just finagling things all over the place. And all of a sudden, there was a sputtering, a gurgling, and I could feel it start vibrating in my hand. The pump came back to life. So I took the last of what I had of thermal paste, reapplied, reinstalled the Kraken, and prayed. And I had a CPU fan error, but that was my own fault. I didn't push the connector far enough onto the CPU fan header. So when I was double checking all the connections, I felt it move in just like another, maybe just tiny bit. It wasn't even a whole lot. It was just enough that when I started the system back up a second time, it went right into Windows, CAM loaded up, and showed that everything was nominal. Everything was working as it should be. So 3 days, 2 coolers, and a whole lot of thermal paste later, my Kraken is back up and running. It is working as it's supposed to. I tested it out at idle, of course, and at load, and everything seemed to be nominal. In fact, it might be possible that the Thermal Grizzly Cryonaut did actually, as this whole thing was started because I wanted to see if the thermal paste would make any difference, it may have brought my load temperatures down a few degrees Celsius. Still has to be confirmed, but the initial burn on a stress test to see if things were working correctly showed a lot lower load temperature than I normally would see. Even though I know it takes about 30 minutes for the liquid to saturate and reach peak efficiency. Usually I saw a temperature spike into the low to mid 70s almost immediately, and I didn't see that this time. So we'll see. Next render will really tell me everything I need to know about the improvements there. So there's a moral to this story. If something's not working, don't immediately discount it. You know, there are ways, like in the case of an AIO, you can kind of jostle it around a little bit and see if that gets it going a little bit. And if you're lucky, the pump isn't actually dead, it just had air introduced into the system. And I think that's what happened here. Air got introduced into the pump. It couldn't spin the air out. I don't really know exactly how, you know, it ended up this way. I wasn't like holding it upside down or anything like that. I got the dust out of the radiator and reinstalled it, and it was giving me issues. But we were able to work through those issues. The valuable lesson here, though, is keep an extra cooler around. Even if it's just, you know, a mid-level air cooler or something that you could slap onto your system. That way you can get it up and running. And in the case of some of these AIOs, you can connect these while the system is running to kind of see if you can get them going again. At least the X62 you can. I'm not so sure about the EVGA one, but I would imagine since it uses a micro USB cable, it would be the same story. Once you get the system up and running, you can connect the cooler and maybe work out whatever is going on with it. The other thing is that it made me really think about the purpose and the place of AIOs in the marketplace right now. They've come a really long way. They've done a lot of good things for people who want to get into kind of a water cooling scenario without actually investing the several $100s into a custom loop that it typically would take. But are they really something to look at? Is it what is their place right now? And I think that's a video to think about. You know, is this a discussion that we should be having? Especially since so many of these AIOs use proprietary software and control, and they don't necessarily play nice with other pieces of software. You know, what can we do going forward to improve AIOs and how they function, and what do we do when they break? I mean, these guys come with long warranties. Are we going to continuously deal with manufacturers who don't want to maybe honor that warranty because of user error? I think if you have a situation where something isn't working, just take the thing back. But be that as it may, did learn how to work the air out of the system, work the air through the system, so that if this is the case, if there is air in the pump, you can get up and running again. And we learned the value of having an extra cooler, and we learned that you should actually clean your system out every once in a while. The radiator was pretty gross when I looked at it, but it's been about a year, so it was time. I think that's about it, though, for this video. I just wanted to kind of discuss, you know, this issue that I had, what I learned from the experience, and what you could possibly learn from it as well. And no, the lesson, again, is not to avoid AIOs, and it is not to avoid, you know, cleaning out your system. It's what do you do when something goes wrong? How can you work through it? There's always a solution. There's always a way through it. Luckily, AIOs, you can get a decent 240 or 280 millimeter AIO for around $100 to $120, even less sometimes. And that's usually enough to get you back up on your feet. And if that's all it takes to get the original product back and working, then I think that's worth having around. It's just something to consider. This also leads me into the part of the video where I sit there and say, I am going to start planning a custom loop. I have been wanting to do this for a while. I know it's a little more elaborate, it's a little more maintenance, but it's something I've been wanting to do. Obviously, there are upgrades that I would want to make before I do this loop. I would like to get a better processor in there, 5960X, 6900K, 6950X, but those are all still pretty expensive unless you buy them used, and I'm not sure how I feel about going that route right now. I'd also like to get my hands on a GTX 1080 Ti reference because I feel silly taking the air cooler off of that Asus Strix 1070. It just feels like a real waste of a beefy air cooler to do that. But be that as it may, if I'm going to water cool, I want to go the full route. I want to cool the CPU and the graphics card. I may even do a monoblock. We'll see. Another thing I've thought about doing is just going on to X299, because if I'm going to pay nearly $1,000 for a 6900K, I might as well get a 7900X. But then we enter in upgrading the motherboard. Other upgrades I want to do as well, you know, memory and such. But we could discuss about that. We could discuss that in another video, because I do want to talk about this build. It's been about a year, and there's a lot of stuff to go over. So anyway, that's going to do it for this video. Hope you learned a little something, that it is possible to bring an AIO back to life if it doesn't seem to be working. There are going to be cases where the pump is just dead and you're going to have to get it, you know, you're going to have to get it replaced. But in the off chance that it's just air, you can bring it back, and this is something that I've seen happen, so I know it can be done. I just wanted to take a minute though, and I just wanted to take a few minutes and talk about the experience and what I learned from it, so that if you deal with something like this, you know that it can be done. That's going to do it though for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to do a video here soon, I think, on the state of AIOs, as well as a look at the last year with this computer, and go from there. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll catch you in the next one.